before we give it all back.
There are serious financial management problems.
Are we potentially at a point where we might actually lose the financial system as we know it?
And you're standing there and you suddenly realize, hey, I'm still here.
Don't be a victim of the current economic crisis. Turn the tables on the banksters, collection agencies, and other crooks. You can stress out trying to find a way to make the minimum payments every month, or you can get them to pay you. Join hosts Jesse and Dave every Monday at 12 p.m. Eastern Time for What Lies in Your Debt, right here on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. Where information never sleeps.
Are you pondering what I'm pondering? Stop it, Pinky, or I shall have to hurt you.
Excuse me, what do you want to do tonight?
Excuse me, I'd like to ask you a few questions.
I look good. I mean, really good.
Hey, everyone! Come and see how good I look! Ladies and gentlemen, can I please have your attention? I've just been handed an urgent and horrifying news story. And I need all of you to stop what you're doing and listen. Cannonball!
I want your DOR.
No, sir.
I want your DOR.
I ain't gonna quit.
Spell it. D-O-R.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Revolution Radio, and it is time for the Opperman Report with Mr. Ed Opperman right here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, where information never sleeps and the seed of freedom rides with you.
Don't ever let them see you coming.
And so, with no further ado, I present to you Ed Opperman.
Hey guys, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Ed Opperman. I'm a private investigator, and I'm a digital forensic investigator. I specialize in email tracing, internet defamation cases, cyber stalking investigations, and I've been tracing emails and locating and identifying people online since about 1997 when I got involved in the Art Bell feud, and helped him out and testified in his case there. I have a blog called The Opperman Report, and I wrote a book called How to Succeed as a Private Investigator, which is available on my website, emailrevealer.com. Before we get started today, I'd really like to thank my producer, Ann, for all her help in getting the show together and a lot of the behind-the-scenes work that goes on around here in getting a show on Revolutionary Radio. I must have heard from about 10 people this week telling me about what a great job Ann does and how she is such a support for me and really has my back and is so passionate about her work and her work on this show. So I really, really want to thank Ann, my executive producer. And I want to thank some of the other producers on the station as well, like Amat Painter and Kat Jenkins and Tones and even Nighthawk and all these guys. If I'm leaving somebody else out, like Jer Bear, please forgive me if I'm leaving out. It's not intentional. I want to thank everybody, and especially Ann for all the compliments I've gotten this week about what a great job she does behind the scenes for me. Now, let's not forget this is a listener-sponsored station. We have no corporate sponsors. So if you want to support our station, you have to visit freedomslips.com and click on the donate button. And you can also visit my blog and visit my sponsors to support this show in particular. Now, my guest today, he's on hold, and the last thing you want to do is have an attorney on hold because you get billed for that time, okay? I don't know if you're aware of that, okay? And he's a trial attorney from Fort Worth, Texas, and he's the author of the book, The Man from 2063, and that book's available on Amazon. So now while I got Jack on hold, please visit Amazon, check out his book, pull out your credit card, and, get in line to get the book before it all gets sold out. And you can also check out his law firm's website, which is called jackduffylaw.com. Okay, so if you're in trouble down there in Fort Worth, Texas, you need to hire a trial attorney, Jack Duffy's your man. Now, if you missed last week's show, you can always find the shows on the station's YouTube channel, which is Revolution Radio. or you can just search on YouTube for the Opperman Report, and then you can find all my shows, and you can subscribe to the YouTube channel, so that way you don't miss anything in the future. Now, last week I got a lot of feedback during the week about the retired NYPD detective Jim Rothstein, who was my guest last week. And mainly most of the feedback was about the Nicky Barnes story and the connections to Rudy Giuliani and the recording of Nicky Barnes in prison negotiating with Giuliani's investigators on a deal to get back at his enemies. So I found a clip of that audio of Nicky Barnes negotiating with Giuliani's investigators from prison, and I put that up on the YouTube channel. It's up on the Opperman Report, and I'm even going to put it all, add it when I remember, to the blog post about Jim Rothstein stuff. Okay, a couple other things. We got a lot of feedback about the French Connection, stolen heroin, and how I was discussing that. I had posted the link to the interview on the Staten Island Memories group on Facebook, and there's like 10,000 members on there. And a lot of people know this story about, the French Connection getting stolen and, supposedly who might have been involved. And there was a lot of controversy about that, a lot of feedback. People accusing me of talking out of turn or being a rat or not, being a, I don't know, not being a stand-up guy for Staten Island. So, but, I believe it's information a lot of people know and it should get out there. We also discussed the Police Commissioner Michael Codd. And I heard from the Codd family. Michael Codd, the police commissioner at the time, was the brother of my school teacher in high school. My auto shop teacher, Bart Codd, was the brother of the police commissioner. And I mentioned the police commissioner a couple of times last week, and I heard from his family, and it was really nice to reminisce and hear them. They were very gracious and very appreciative to hear me talk about, Bart and Mike. And I learned some things that I didn't know, so I'm very grateful for that whole thing. Now, we're going to be talking today about JFK, and Jim from last week, he has his own JFK theories as well. He was involved in the Bay of Pigs invasion in the Navy, and I believe that he arrested Frank Sturgis. He has some kind of a Frank Sturgis story, and I'm not 100% clear on what it is, but I'd like to get our guest today's take on that too as well. But I can't wait to have Jim on again, Jim Rothstein, the NYPD detective. And it's kind of funny because after the show, we talked a lot after the show, and I kind of asked around about him because we know a lot of the same people back in New York, and I suppose he was asking around about me too, checking me out as well. And next week we have coming up Steph Watts, okay? That's S-T-E-P-H Watts, W-A-T-T-S. And he's an investigative reporter, TV producer. He's been on Nancy Grace, Fox News, Inside Edition. He's a lot of work on TV. And he's been in a couple of books. Mark Furman wrote a book and included him in the book. So we'll be on there. We'll be discussing all kind of true crime stuff and different cases he's working on, different TV shows he's working on. I'm looking forward to that. Steph Watts, it's kind of funny, too, because me and Steph were Facebook friends, and we had a lot of debates about the Zimmerman case. And I'm not sure if he realizes that I'm the same guy that he's been fighting with on Facebook. So we'll find out about that. That could be fun. I also have coming up Pat Brown, the criminal profile that you see on the HLN and Court TV all the time. And she'll be coming on in a couple of weeks. And also a good friend of mine, Vito Colucci, who's a private investigator from Connecticut. But he lives in Henderson, Nevada now. He's retired. He's semi-retired, I guess. And he wrote a book called Rogue Town about the organized crime stories over there in Connecticut and stuff like that. And he's involved in this Skakel case. If you're watching this thing about the Skakel, the Kennedy case going on over there, he's involved in that. And he testified in that case, and that just hit the news. It's a big story going on right now in the news. I also have a guy coming up named William Ramsey. He's the author of Abomination, Devil Worship, and Deception in the West Memphis 3 Murders. And he'll be coming on. We'll be doing another show about the West Memphis 3 just with him. And then we'll be having again Terry Hobbs and Todd Moore and Sean Wheeler back to do another show about the West Memphis 3 after that. Now, real quick, I was dragged into this controversy last week about Dr. Bill Weld and this hoax going on the Internet. With this guy named Justin Tribble, who's putting on this kind of performance art prank, internet prank. He did a prank previously to this involving Joel Osteen. And what do you call it? So anyway, I checked this thing out thoroughly, okay, back when it came up about 10 days ago. And I have a blog post up about it with some of the details. Now, since then, I followed up even further, and there is absolutely no credibility to the story. Don't worry. Bill Wells is a hoax. He basically admits and comes out and says he's a hoax. And anyone who wants to compare this to Bob Lazar is just nonsense. And in fact, if you really think that this is comparable to Bob Lazar, you can call George Knapp, who's in town here and would know every lawyer in town and would be familiar with a guy in town named Bill Wells if he had any kind of credibility to him. So enough of that. Let's get to Jack Duffy, author of The Man from 2063. Jack, are you there?
I'm here. How are you, Ed?
I'm very good, man. I'm really excited to have you on. So, Jack, tell us about yourself and how you got involved in JFK and a little bit about your history, about your law firm, and about your book.
Sure. Well, I'm originally from Texas. I was born and raised here. My family moved to Fort Worth in 1960. My father was a physician, and he moved our family up here so he could start his medical practice. So I've been in Fort Worth ever since. I went to school in Texas. I went to undergraduate school at Texas Tech University, got a political science degree, then went to graduate school at Baylor University, got an MBA, and then I went to law school at South Texas Law School in Houston and got my JD, and then I've been a practicing attorney here in Fort Worth since then. I specialize in trial work in my law practice, mainly personal injury, plaintiff's personal injury, criminal defense, and some family law. As far as Kennedy, what got me interested in the JFK thing was, first of all, I was in second grade the day it happened. I was in Bruce Yoki Elementary in Fort Worth, Texas, when I heard about what had happened. I remember my school teacher, Charlene Morgan, came in and started crying, and the principal came over the air on an intercom and told our whole class, told the whole school that Kennedy had been shot and that school was being dismissed for the rest of the day. And so we got to go home early, which I thought was kind of cool because I was 7 years old. And I didn't realize how important it was what had happened to President Kennedy at the time, being so young. But I still remember the day very well, like it was yesterday, as most people do who are old enough to remember. My interest didn't really start getting serious about this until about 1972, when I was in high school. My father had seen a copy of the Zapruder film from somebody who'd gotten it from a researcher who had gotten it from Jim Garrison in New Orleans. And the copy that he saw was a bootleg copy that wasn't very clear, but you could see what was going on in the film. And my father had seen Kennedy. Both my parents had seen President Kennedy in Fort Worth the morning of November 22nd, right before he was killed. He gave his final speech in Fort Worth at the breakfast that morning, and they were both there to see and hear Kennedy. And I don't know if they ever supported Kennedy in the election. I never did ask my dad if he voted for him, but my dad always said that he'd been there to see Kennedy.
Well, let me get this straight. You saw the Zapruder film before it was ever on TV.
That's correct.
Oh, excellent. Now, you saw it in 72, you said.
Yes, it was on TV for the first time in 1975.
Oh, wow, okay.
Put it on national television. But there were bootleg copies being circulated around at the time before the film was ever shown on television. So I'd seen it way before it was on TV. And so, of course, I kind of knew what had happened already because I'd seen it. And then that's what piqued my interest in the whole thing. Until then, I really didn't have that much interest, to be honest with you. But then when I saw the film, I thought, wait a minute, there's something wrong here. This shot that killed Kennedy in the head looked like it came from the front, not from the rear. And, of course, everybody who's seen the film now knows that the president reacts going back and to the left from the impact of the fatal headshot, which proves to me and millions of other people that the laws of physics prove that shot came from the grassy knoll, not from Lee Harvey Oswald. But we'll get into that more later. But anyway, that's what got me interested in the case, and I started collecting books on it. I immediately went to bookstores and started buying every book I could off the shelf that had to do with the Kennedy assassination. And from that point forward, I've just been obsessed with this almost to the point where I spend all my free time researching this thing and talking to people, and it's just become a full-time thing outside my law practice now, and that's why I wrote the book. I decided to write a book about this after, researching it for so many years because I always wanted to write something about my research. But the reason why I wrote the book the way I did as a fictional/fact fiction book is because there had already been hundreds and hundreds of nonfiction books that had been written about it by that point in time, and I didn't want to just repeat the same stuff that had been written by hundreds of other people because that wouldn't accomplish anything. So what I did is I took the research that other people had done plus my own research and combined it with known facts that can be proven in court with a fictional storyline about a guy who comes from the future where there's a time machine that's been developed, and he goes back in time and solves the crime and finds out who was behind it and prevents it from happening, and Kennedy doesn't get killed in the book. President Kennedy survives and goes on to serve out 2 terms, which he probably would have had he not been killed. and then I show how the world and the United States in particular would have been different had that happened. I still believe to this day that if President Kennedy had lived, we would not have been in the Vietnam War like we did with Johnson. So that's what led to the book being written, and so I'm very proud of the book. I think it's a very good book, not because I wrote it, because I think it tells a good story, and it's not just total fiction. Some people may think, well, this is just a made up thing. Yeah, sure, a lot of it is fiction, but a lot of it's not fiction. A lot of it's based on hard facts mixed in with fiction.
Well, if you look on Amazon and you see the reviews of the book, everyone who's read it appreciates it, and for the factual content in it, as well as the fictional part about the time travel that you put in, which is a good perspective. No one's done it before.
Yeah. Well, Stephen King actually wrote a book kind of similar to that, but his book is totally different from mine. He has Oswald killing Kennedy, which of course I don't believe that, but he did about a time travel book right before mine came out, which kind of upset me because I found out what he was doing after I'd already finished my book before it got published. So.
Well, no one's heard of him anyway, so don't worry about it.
But that's why I wrote the book.
Okay, great. Okay, so let's hear it, man. What's your theory?
Well, it's based on a lot of hard evidence. I'm a trial lawyer, so I don't like to speculate on things that I can't prove. But based on 50 years of solid, hard research by dozens and dozens of other researchers and my own research, too, if I was going to put money on the table today about who killed John F. Kennedy, first of all, I can tell you who did not kill John F. Kennedy, and that's Lee Harvey Oswald. I can prove that now. Oswald did not fire the fatal shot that killed Kennedy, so therefore Oswald didn't kill Kennedy.
Well, let me interrupt you for 1 second here, because I noticed that you said how you met Bugliosi, right? And he inspired you to become a lawyer. But now his whole theory is that he thinks Oswald did it, correct?
Right. Yeah, Vince and I are good friends, but we just disagree on the Kennedy case. He's convinced that Oswald did it alone. He's got his own, reasons for believing that, and I understand where he's coming from, but I don't want to say anything negative about Vince. I think he's a great lawyer, obviously, and he wrote a very good book. It's just that he and I just have different opinions on the evidence.
Okay.
But getting back to my theory about who I think did it, if I was going to put money on the table, and I can support this with hard evidence, it's not just speculation. There's my belief in my own heart that people connected with the Central Intelligence Agency, not necessarily the high muckety-mucks, but just people that are connected with it in some form, either agents or rogue agents, along with organized crime figures and anti-Castro Cubans, were all involved in the conspiracy that killed Kennedy and all for different separate reasons. But there's evidence that points directly to all three of those groups, hard evidence that would be admissible in a court of law that could tie all three of those groups together in a conspiracy.
Excellent. Okay, I think we're on the same page. Now, what about, are you familiar with the book Coup d'etat in America?
Yes.
Okay, A.J. Weberman, right?
Yes.
A.J. Weberman's a friend of mine. I was friends with A.J. back when I was in high school, when he had just put the book out. Now, he came up with the three tramps. Now, you agree with that, correct?
Right. Yeah, there's speculation about, who they really were. I know people believe one of them was Charles Harrelson, who was a hitman that killed a federal judge in San Antonio. They think that one of the tramps might have been E. Howard Hunt, a CIA guy, and then some other person that I forget who the other guy's name is. They think that those who they really were, but I can't say for sure if that's true or not. I mean, I've read the theories, I've seen the photos, and they do resemble those people, but I'm not prepared to say 100% that's who they were. So I mean, it's what
about recently? There's some speculation about a photo of a young George Bush standing in the crowd too.
Yeah, I've seen that photo, and the guy does look like President Bush the first, but it's not positive identification, so I don't want to say one way or the other if that really is him or not. I don't know. I can't say for sure that that's him in the picture.
Okay, so if you think it's CIA guys, can you name any names? Do you have any names in mind?
Sure. Well, first of all, David Phillips, who's deceased now, he was the head of the CIA's assassination squad in the early 60s. David Phillips was a very mysterious figure. He was seen with Oswald in Dallas several weeks before Kennedy was killed by a Cuban who worked with Phillips at the time. And the Cuban saw both Oswald and him talking in the lobby of the hotel while he was waiting to meet with Phillips. The Cuban guy has been verified as having been there. He swears up and down and has testified that the person that was with the Phillips fight was Lee Harvey Oswald. He identified Oswald later on. Now, he can be mistaken, of course, but if he wasn't mistaken, then there's a connection right there between Phillips and Oswald meeting each other in the weeks before this happened. Other evidence that points to the CIA being involved, or possibly being involved, there was a man down in Mexico City in late September of 1963 that was not Lee Harvey Oswald, that was using Oswald's name. This man called the Russian embassy and the Cuban embassy and identified himself as Lee Harvey Oswald. He spoke very poor Russian on the phone, whereas the real Oswald spoke excellent Russian. He said his name was Lee Oswald, and he asked for some messages that were left for him. The CIA photographed the man coming out with their cameras, and they have the pictures of this man today. The House committee saw those pictures in the 1970s, and the man is not Lee Harvey Oswald. It's obviously somebody else. So who this man was and why he was impersonating Oswald... Hello?
Yeah, I'm here.
Who this man was and why he was impersonating Oswald has never been disclosed or has never been totally revealed to this day, why he was down there impersonating Oswald. So the CIA first denied that the audio tapes that they made of this man's phone calls. At first, David Phillips testified under oath before the committee in the 70s that the tapes had been erased, that they no longer existed. And then when he was confronted with proof to the contrary, that the actual committee had actually gotten a hold of the tapes and that they did exist, and that the voice didn't match Oswald's, and he left the room without permission and just walked out without testifying, he got caught in a lie in front of the committee. So there's another piece of evidence that points to CIA involvement in setting Oswald up possibly for an assassination. There's a lot more evidence than that, though, that points to the CIA about what their motive might have been to get rid of Kennedy. So we can start with them. And there's other people, of course, that are likely involved in this thing.
Wait 1 second, Matt. You just struck my memory for something here. Are you familiar with the name Anthony Pellicano?
Anthony, what's his last name?
Pellicano, the PI in California, because I believe he did some of the audio enhancements that was used in front of the House, the assassinations hearings.
Right. Okay. And what tapes did he listen to?
I think it was the one of the motorcycle cop where they tried to come up with.
Yeah, that's the acoustic evidence. Yeah, we haven't gotten into that yet, but I'll be glad to talk about that. Yeah, that's the tape that was made by an officer named McLean, who was in the motorcade.
Right.
And the House committee had their own experts from New York, an acoustical expert, examined those tapes, and they came up with the conclusion that there were at least 4 shots that were fired on the tape, which meant more than one gunman, which meant a conspiracy.
Yeah.
And of course, that has been attacked over the years by other experts who say no, those weren't rifle shots or gunshots; those were just other noises, but they weren't gunfire. So now you've got a dispute to this day about whether or not the tape really does have gunshots on it or not. I haven't heard the tape, but Robert Groden, who's a good friend of mine, who was on the House committee panel, has done tons of research on the case over the last 50 years, told me that he was on the panel when they did the acoustical evidence, and that they came up with 5 distinct gunshot patterns on that tape. But the experts agreed it had to have been gunshots. But I'm not an expert on acoustics, but I know that's what Groden told me, and I agree with it. There had to be at least 4 to 5 shots fired at Kennedy.
Do you know the name of the expert that they used from New York?
A guy named Weiss. I forget his first name. But
okay, no.
Yeah, and he's the one that did the testified, did the work on this for the committee.
Okay, so you left off. We have a fake Oswald running around.
Right.
Oh boy. Well.
Let me embellish that a little bit.
Yeah.
Not only was there an imposter Oswald in Mexico City, but in the weeks right before the assassination, somebody was using Oswald or impersonating Oswald in Dallas. We know that because Albert Bogart was a used car salesman in Dallas who ran a used car. He was a salesman at a used car lot right near DB Plaza. And a man walked up on his lot on November the 2nd of 1963, about 3 weeks before the killing of Kennedy, and introduced himself as Lee Harvey Oswald. And he told him he was looking for a used car. And Bogart said, fine, here's a car here, here's one here. And the guy picked out a red Mercury and said, I'd like to test drive this. And so they got in the car, and the real Oswald didn't know how to drive, by the way. But this guy got in the car. He drove the car like 80, 90 miles an hour on the freeway there and really scared the salesman. And then when they got back to the lot, the guy started talking about the Soviet Union. He told Bogart that he had been in Russia and that he really liked Russian cars better than American cars. He started making derogatory remarks about the United States, saying that he was a communist and so on and so forth, basically drawing attention to himself, making a big scene in front of a lot of people. And Bogart remembered the guy well because he repeated the name Oswald several times like he wanted to remember the name. The reason why we know that this man couldn't have been the real Oswald is because the real Oswald didn't know how to drive a car, number one, had never driven a car, didn't own a car. So it couldn't have been Oswald because he didn't even know how to drive. At the same time, the real Oswald was known to have been in another part of Dallas on that same day. So for some reason, here's a guy impersonating Oswald. And then another incident took place at a rifle range about a week later. It could have been the same individual for all we know. There was a man that appeared at a rifle range with a high-powered rifle with a telescopic scope on. He was shooting at other people's targets on purpose. And one of the men's targets that he was shooting at walked up to him and started challenging him and said, why are you shooting at my target, buddy? And he said, well, my name's Lee Harvey Oswald. He repeated the name Oswald several times, made a big scene in front of a bunch of people, and said, I can shoot whatever I want, and blah, 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 and went on, and then he left. The only problem with the story is that the real Oswald could not have been at the rifle range that day. He was documented to be somewhere else, according to his wife. So here we have incidences of not just in Mexico, but here in Dallas itself, where somebody's going around using Oswald's name on purpose for some reason.
Let me ask you this. Wasn't there something, too, about Oswald right before the shooting that he was running around telling people that he was going to be leaving his job and going to work for NASA?
I've never heard that story before.
Okay, yeah, I heard it. I'm probably not getting it correct. Okay, now what about all the stuff about the woman that he was living with? Not Marina, but the woman who owned the house and her connection. She had a lot of CIA background and stuff, correct?
Ruth Payne?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I don't want to say on the radio that she was CIA because I can't prove that, but of course that's some of the theories have been circling around that she was working for the government or the CIA behind closed doors, and for all I know that could be true, but I just don't have any hard evidence to say for sure, so I don't want to go down that road necessarily.
Okay, I got you.
She was kind of a suspicious character, though, and she still is. I think she lives in California today.
Oh, really? So she's still alive? She's still around?
Yeah, she's still alive.
Now, what about Marina Oswald? She's still alive, right?
Yeah, I interviewed her about 6 or 7 years ago. Me and Vincent Bugliosi actually talked to her together in Dallas for about an hour. And Marina is a very intelligent woman. I was very impressed with her. She told us both that she felt like the entire case was a conspiracy, that Lee didn't kill Kennedy, that he was set up by whoever did it. And she went on to explain why she felt that way, that she said that he was very mysterious, that he would leave and go places without telling her where he'd been, like he was meeting people behind her back somewhere. He always talked very highly of Kennedy, she told us, that he never said anything bad about John F. Kennedy. In fact, he always praised John F. Kennedy whenever the subject came up. So she just feels like that he was set up by the people that killed Kennedy as the fall guy, and she still believes that to this day, that he was innocent, that he never fired a shot at Kennedy, and I agree with her. Okay, we only got about a minute left. So we're speaking with the attorney Jack Duffy, a trial lawyer from Fort Worth, Texas, who's the author of the book The Man from 2063, and that's available on Amazon. And this is an incredible wealth of information. Here's a guy who's interviewed most of the names that we all see researching this case. This man has actually met them. He saw the Zapruder film before anybody did, before it ever hit the news. So that's just incredible. That's really exciting. When we get back, I'm going to make him. I'm going to make him tell me about all the different witnesses he's interviewed firsthand and stuff like that, and we'll get into that whole kind of thing. So that's Jack Duffy, trial lawyer, Fort Worth, Texas, author of the book The Man from 2063, available on Amazon.com. Keep going. Okay. What question do you want me to ask you when we get back? Well, let's get into the medical evidence for one thing about the evidence that proves there was a conspiracy. I'd like to talk about that for a while, and then we can get into the eyewitness evidence.
Okay, great. Well, here we go for the break.
Radio at freedomslips.com. We'll be right back after this message.
Most guys freeze. That's your cerebral cortex looking for an answer it doesn't have.
See? Even your brain knows you're screwed.
The body's filling with adrenaline right now, whether you know it or not. Your heart's beating fast. It's getting a little harder to breathe. The neurobiological system is telling it to run, but your knees are too weak to move.
Fear is not real. The only place that fear can exist is in our thoughts of the future. It is a product of our imagination, causing us to fear things that do not at present and may not ever exist. That is near insanity. Do not misunderstand me. Danger is very real, but fear It's a choice. We are all telling ourselves a story.
You're listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. 100% listener-supported radio. Reporting the danger, unafraid. Right here, where information never sleeps. Revolution Radio.
Who owns you? If you're not in control, then someone else is. Join me, Ivy West, for Voices on the Wind, Saturday from 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern in Studio A. I discuss government, health, metaphysics, suppressed science, universal mysteries, little-known incredible facts, alternative energies, and even more than you can imagine. Won't you join us on Revolution Radio Saturdays from 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern for Voices on the Wind with me, Ivy West.
There are lives in the balance, people under fire, children at the cannons.
Because if your head's in the sand, your tail is a target.
The Empire is in peril.
You're probably too young to know, but the Empire is always in some kind of peril. I may have been overly rude earlier when I called you a pirate. And I may have been overly charitable when I said I wasn't.
You want answers? I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth! You can't handle the truth!
Be here Tuesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern Time to catch Roxy Lopez straight from the Valley of the Sun. Her discussions run from chemtrails to sovereignty, aliens to conspiracy facts. So join us for The Truth Denied with Roxy Lopez. Again, that's Tuesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. You don't need to expect us. We're already here.
You ever get tired of being wrong? You can't kill the future.
You know what the difference is between you and me? I make this look good.
Revolution Radio. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Okay, we're back with the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Ed Opperman, and we have our guest today, Attorney Jack Duffy, JackDuffyLaw.com, the author of The Man from 2063. Now, the thing is this. We're not going to be able to cover everything, man. This guy has a wealth of information, so I'm going to beg him to come back and do another show with us. But you got to buy the book. If you guys go out and buy the book, he'll have a motivation to come back and give us. The guy actually, he's interviewed all these people. He knows Marina Oswald. We got to get him back. So I'm begging you, Jack, please come back. Okay. All right, because I got a million questions for you. Okay, now one thing I heard recently was that Hoover demanded that the CIA turn over a report of everything they knew about Oswald, everything they knew about the assassination, and the guy who delivered the report was named George Bush. Is that true?
I have never heard that before in my life, so that's an interesting. I
Yeah.
don't know that. I have no reason to believe that. I've never heard that before.
Gotcha. Okay. Now, can you just give us, before we get into the medical stuff you want to go, I'm going to let you take this any direction you want to go, okay? But give us a list of all the people that you've interviewed personally in this case.
Oh, boy. Well, I've interviewed Bill Newman and his family, actually him and his wife. They were two of the closest eyewitnesses to the assassination. I interviewed Beverly Oliver. She was another key eyewitness. I interviewed Jean Hill. She was another key witness who's unfortunately deceased now. I've interviewed Mary Mormon. She's another key witness that was there. Those were so many of the witnesses have died over the years that I didn't get to talk to them, unfortunately, before they passed away. But those are 4 or 5 of the key ones that I've interviewed. And now, of course, I've interviewed many researchers. I know almost every major researcher that's done work on the case. I've met them and talked to them about their research. So those are the main. Of course, Marina Oswald is probably the most important person I've interviewed. So those are the key people that I've talked to. I've talked to several police officers that were involved in the case. So those are the main people that I've talked to. Unfortunately, so many people have died over the years that they're not available around or not around anyone to talk to. So all we have is their testimony.
Now, what about Johnson? Johnson, he was from Texas. He's a very corrupt guy. There was even some story about how one of his main fixers over there in town, his print was found up there at the school book depository, no?
Yeah, there's a theory that a guy named Malcolm Wallace, who was a hitman that had killed people for Johnson, that his palm print is on one of the boxes that was found in the sniper's nest. I've seen the story on that, and they say they have the fingerprint evidence to prove it. So that's all I know about that. I can't say for sure if it's true or not, but the evidence seems to point, if that's correct, that he was up there handling some boxes at least, and then if he was up there, he probably was a shooter. But that's a whole different story that other researchers have zeroed in on. I haven't done, my research hasn't focused on that angle of the story, but I've read about it, and I don't dispute it.
Well, Johnson had to be somehow involved because obviously everything was suppressed in the local Dallas. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I did interview, one more person I did interview that I left out was Madeline Brown, who was Johnson's mistress. I did interview her.
Okay.
She told me that the night before the assassination that Johnson attended a meeting at the home of Clint Murchison, who was the owner of the Dallas Cowboys at the time, and that according to her, H.L. Hunt, who was a huge, wealthy oil man at the time in Dallas, was there at the meeting along with LBJ. Nixon was supposedly at the meeting. There were several other high people that were at this meeting. And this is her story, not mine, but she told me that she was at the home there where they had the meeting. This was the Thursday before the assassination. After the meeting was over, she wasn't inside, so she didn't know what they talked about, but she said after the meeting was over, Johnson came out, and according to her, and what she told me, she said Johnson made a remark to her that, hey, honey, after tomorrow, the Kennedys will never embarrass me again. That's not a threat, that's a promise. And she looked at him like, okay, what are you talking about? He said, just wait and see. And then, of course, the next day, Kennedy was killed. And then she started thinking about what LBJ had told her the night before, and she started asking him about it, and he wouldn't say anything. And she kept bugging him, and he finally told her on New Year's Eve of 1963 that the oil people and CIA people and so forth had gotten rid of Kennedy, and that's all she needed to know.
Right, I'm familiar with that woman's story. Now, didn't she also get like an allowance from Johnson for years and years?
I'm not sure about that. She didn't tell me that, so I don't know. But it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, now she's still alive and walking around today.
No, she's deceased.
Okay.
But yeah. So that's another interesting side effect on this. I do believe Johnson had something to do with the assassination. I believe that he either knew it was going to happen ahead of time, or he definitely participated in the cover afterwards. So either way, he's an accessory to the crime.
It seems, too, that so many of the local media guys down there in Texas, too, went on to get these great big careers, like Mike Wallace.
Yes.
Yeah. So what do you think went on there? Do you think like they all know what happened and somehow they were able to leverage that influence and get big careers?
Like the media people that reported the assassination?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I don't want to accuse them of hiding or covering up anything because I don't have any proof that they did that. But the major media has always supported the government line from day one. They've always supported the lone gunman theory. To this day, they still support it. Any book that comes out that says Oswald did it is an immediate bestseller on New York Times because the media pushes it into the spotlight.
Right.
They don't do that with conspiracy books. So for some reason they've got an agenda here that they're trying to protect for 50 years now, and the agenda has been proven to be full of holes. It's laughable at this point. Anyone who thinks that one person killed John F. Kennedy either doesn't know the evidence or is just living in fantasy land.
Right. So now in the beginning, a lot of the eyewitnesses and stuff like that were threatened, intimidated, and a lot of them died mysteriously and stuff like that. Have you experienced any kind of repercussions from this?
No, nobody's called me up and told me they're going to kill me yet. So.
Not yet.
Not yet.
We haven't started taking calls yet.
I do want to mention, though, talking about death threats, Jean Hills, who was one of the key witnesses that I did interview, she's the lady in the red raincoat that you see in the Zapruder film when you watch the film of his assassination. She's the lady standing in the background on the other side of the opposite from the grassy knoll. Jean told me that she saw the shooter fire the fatal shot from behind the picket fence right on the grassy knoll right in front of her. She was looking right at that area when the shot went off, and the one that hit Kennedy in the head. She said she saw the smoke from the gun go off and heard the sound of the shot, and she ran up there with dozens and dozens of other witnesses who all ran up there immediately to try to catch the man. And she was put in a chokehold by a guy who said he was an FBI agent up on the knoll. And then after she told the Dallas police her story that afternoon, over the years she told me she was threatened or received death threats over the telephone from different people warning her to shut up about what she had seen. This is her telling me this directly to my face. And I have no reason to disbelieve her because she was a very credible person when I talked to her. And she was threatened that she would be killed if she didn't shut up about what she had seen. Lots of other people received death threats or were told to change their story, and we'll get into that more if you want to. So go ahead.
Well, you mentioned the lady in the red raincoat, and it brought to my memory Umbrella Man. The man who started pumping his umbrella.
Right.
Yeah. Now, who do you think that was? There's a lot of speculation that people think that's Gordon Neville.
Well, the House committee supposedly identified this guy, and he supposedly testified before the committee that he was the man with the umbrella and that it was just an innocent thing, had nothing to do with the assassination. He was just out there protesting Kennedy because Kennedy failed to provide an umbrella of cover for the Bay of Pigs. That's what the umbrella represented, the lack of cover, air cover that Kennedy gave to the Bay of Pigs. That's what his story was. And he said that had nothing to do with the assassination. He was just an innocent bystander. And the committee believed him and just let it go with that. So I don't know for sure, if that was the real guy or if he just made something up or if he was part of the plot. And we just don't know yet. There's so many things about this case that we just don't know about. That's the problem with it.
And so many different theories, and it seems like a lot of theories get thrown out there just to distract us in the wrong direction, send us on a little
one of the stupidest theories, and I want to dispel it right now, in my opinion it's a kooky theory, is there's a new program coming out this coming anniversary about a Secret Service agent who supposedly fired the fatal shot from his gun in the follow-up car by accident.
Right.
And they've got a whole documentary on this that's going to be coming out. It's called The Smoking Gun. It was made by some guy in Australia. The only problem with the story is that it's been totally debunked. Number one, there was a film taken by a man named Charles Bronson, not the movie star, but another man named Charles Bronson, who was a bystander who witnessed the assassination. He took a film of the assassination, and in his film, you can see the Secret Service follow-up car behind Kennedy's car during the entire shooting, and nothing on that film shows an agent or anybody in the follow-up car shooting Kennedy. So Robert Groden told me that he told the authors of the book that this documentary is based on, he showed them the film and said, here, your theory is baloney. Here's the proof right here. And they said, well, yeah, okay, but we're going to put the book out anyway. So they knew the theory was wrong when they published that book, and the guy who made the documentary, if he'd done his homework, he would know that it's a complete kooky theory that has no basis at all, but yet they're going to put this on the air to convince the American people that, oh, here's what happened to Kennedy from the Secret Service guy. This was ridiculous.
Well, it's funny you would bring that one up because Alan Combs recently kind of endorsed that theory on Twitter. And, Alan Combs from Hannity and Combs, from that, I know him from New York back in the 70s. He was doing stand-up comedy back in those days, and I used to run into him at Pip's Comedy Club in Sheepshead Bay. And this guy knows the Kennedy case. He knows the JFK assassination case backwards and forwards, man. I think almost as good as you when he's sitting there, holding court.
Well, he may.
Yeah, go ahead.
I've seen the Bronson film where he would know that theory's baloney because the film disproves it. It's on film.
Well, no, I agree with you, your take on it. But why do you think someone like that would know this case so well would come out with this bogus story?
With Mr. Combs or?
Yeah, Combs.
Well, I don't know where he's getting his information from, so I don't know. I mean,
okay.
So all I know is that I know people directly who have done. I don't know how many researchers he knows. I don't know if he knows Robert Groden. I know Robert Groden very, very well. He's a close friend of mine. He's one of the top. In fact, you ought to have him on your show before the anniversary. He's coming out with a new book called Absolute Proof. I don't know if you know who Robert Groden is, but
no, I don't.
He's the man. He's from New York originally. He's the man that put the Zapruder film on national television on Geraldo Rivera's show Good Night America on March 1975. This was the first time the Zapruder film was ever shown on national television. Groden is the one that put the film on for the first time, showed the entire United States what happened to Kennedy. And because of that, that's where the House committee came about, because people in Congress saw the film and they were motivated to reopen the case, and that's what caused the creation of the House Select Committee. That film being shown on Geraldo was the crack in the dam that burst it. So Groden knows what he's talking about. He's an expert on the subject. He's coming out with a new book called Absolute Proof. I've seen a copy of the book already. Anybody who believes Oswald killed Kennedy, when they look at that book, it's going to destroy them, because Groden is putting out information. He's got the actual autopsy pictures, not the ones that the House committee published that were fake. Right. He's got the real photos that were not fake that show exactly what happened to Kennedy. And the reason why we know they're not fake photos is because he showed them to every doctor in Dallas while they were alive back in the 70s. Unfortunately, about all 22 doctors that he showed the pictures to all agree that that's what the pictures are authentic. because they show the back of Kennedy's head completely blown open. There's a hole as big as a cantaloupe in the back of Kennedy's head where the bullet came in and blew up the entire back of the head. And he's going to have those photos for the very first. They've never, ever been published ever anywhere in any book until now. And anybody who disputes the one or thinks that one person killed Kennedy, I'd like to see what they think after they see that book and those photos.
Excellent. Now, what do you think about this theory that's bouncing around right now about the missing brain and tissue?
Well, Robert knows where the brain is. He's going to put that in his book, he told me. He claims he knows what happened to it and where it is, so he's got photos of the brain, and that's going to be in this book along with those autopsy pictures. So he's the guy that really ought to talk to you about that, because he says he's going to disclose where the brain is in his book.
Okay, I'd love to talk to him, but he's not here now, and you know, so I'm asking you. Okay.
Well, all I know is what he told me, because nobody knows for sure what the brain is. There's speculation. Some people think Robert Kennedy took the brain and destroyed it or buried it with Kennedy's body later on, or disposed of it. But Robert claims that's not true. That he can prove that that's not what happened. So I don't know. All I know is what Robert Groden's told me and what the other researchers have said. So where the brain is, we'll find out hopefully in Robert Groden's book when it comes out.
Gotta wait for the book, okay. And the name of his book is Absolute Proof by Robert Groden. Okay, definitely. We're gonna have him on. We're gonna have you back on. And maybe I'll get a free book out of him too, right? Okay. So what else do you have to go on? Do you want to continue with the medical stuff?
Yeah, I want to talk about the medical evidence, because if nothing else proves a conspiracy, the medical evidence does. The legitimate medical evidence, not the phony medical evidence. Like I said earlier, 22 doctors and one nurse treated John F. Kennedy in Parkland Hospital in Trauma Room 1 the day he was killed. I met two of the doctors myself. Actually, I met three of them. Two of the three are still alive. One of the doctors that I talked with many years ago was Charles Crenshaw, who was the author of a controversial book called JFK Conspiracy of Silence. Dr. Crenshaw and I got to be very good friends before he passed away. He was a surgeon here in Fort Worth for many years. And not only did Dr. Crenshaw say this, but Dr. Robert McClellan, who is still alive, and Dr. Ronald Jones, who is still alive, all told me recently. I'm good friends with all of them. They all said that the fatal shot that killed John F. Kennedy came from the front, not from the rear. They're trained surgeons. They know gunshot wounds when they see them. They treated them all the time in Parkland Hospital. And they've all said that the back of President Kennedy's head was blown away by a bullet that had come in from the right front, because there was a huge exit wound in the back of the president's head where the bullet had obviously exited out the rear of the head. They said any first-year medical student could tell that just by looking at the wound. So it doesn't take anybody with any real medical ability to figure that out. But all 22 doctors said the same thing, and that's not 1, 2, 3, or 4. That's 22 surgeons all said the same thing over the years. Like I said earlier, Robert Groden showed them the photographs, and they all verified that that's exactly the way the president's head looked in the photos. So now you have 22 medical personnel, trained surgeons, all saying that the fatal shot came from the front. How do you dispute that? I mean, if that's true, then the fatal shot didn't come from Lee Harvey Oswald. It came from somebody on the grass, behind the picket fence. That's number one. Number two, President Kennedy sustained another wound in his throat from a bullet that apparently had come from the front also, because Malcolm Perry, who was a surgeon that worked on Kennedy, he did the tracheotomy on Kennedy's throat wound at Parkland Hospital. Malcolm Perry told the media an hour after Kennedy had died, and it's on video. He was interviewed in a newsroom at Parkland Hospital. He said that the bullet that had hit Kennedy in the throat had come from the front of the car, from in front of the president, not from the rear. Every other doctor that saw the wound all agreed that it was an entrance wound, not an exit wound from the back. So if that's correct, then another shot came from the front also that hit him in the throat. So there you have doctors saying two shots at least came from the front. Now, he also got hit in the rear, and we're not disputing that. Kennedy had a bullet hole in his back, which was never dissected, by the way, at the autopsy like it should have been, to see if it came through or went through his body like the Warren Commission said it did. So we don't know for sure, what happened, except that because the autopsy was not done properly. I'll get into that in just a minute. Had we had a decent autopsy, the autopsy should have been done in Dallas, by the way, under Texas law. People may not be aware of this, but Kennedy's body was forcibly removed by the Secret Service from Parkland Hospital illegally. Dr. Earl Rose, who was the forensic pathologist in Dallas, one of the top forensic pathologists in the country, was going to do the autopsy on John F. Kennedy had he been allowed to do so. And he should have been allowed to have done it because the law said that Kennedy's body should have stayed in Dallas until the autopsy was done. It should not have been taken to Washington, D.C. But the Secret Service and Jackie didn't want to stay there, so they took the body illegally and took him back to Washington where they did the autopsy up there at Bethesda. The problem with the autopsy at Bethesda is that the three pathologists that did the autopsy, none of them were forensic pathologists. And for people who don't know what a forensic pathologist is, a forensic pathologist is a pathologist that is specifically trained for criminal homicides, particularly gunshot wound cases. They are specialized pathologists that examine mainly people who've been killed by violent means, mainly through gunshots and other types of wounds. So that's who should have done the autopsy, people who are trained to do a gunshot autopsy. This is hard to believe. I know you're not going to believe this, but it's true. Not one of the 3 military pathologists that did the autopsy on the most important murder in the history of this country had ever done a gunshot autopsy before in their career. So here you have 3 guys who aren't even trained properly to do this kind of an autopsy on the most important murder victim ever in our country's history. And that's why we have the crummy, incomplete, shoddy autopsy that we have today. And I think it was done on purpose to prevent the truth from coming out about what really happened to President Kennedy.
I would agree with you on that. I would agree with you. Let me ask you this. Now, what about this whole thing about how when Johnson was being sworn in as president on the plane, that they said, well, you have to have a copy of the Constitution, and he happened to have one in his pocket?
Yeah, Sarah Hughes is the federal judge that swore Johnson in, or gave him the oath on the plane,
right.
And she had the Constitution apparently with her, and there's that famous picture of him, being sworn in on the plane with Jackie standing next to him in her blood-stained clothes.
Yeah.
That everybody's seen. But anyway, getting back to the medical evidence for a second, though, not only does the medical evidence support multiple shooters, but Dr. Crenshaw specifically told me that he put Kennedy's body in the casket there in the operating room, and probably he was the last doctor to leave the room, and he looked at Kennedy's head very closely before they put him in the casket, and he said, there's no doubt in my mind what we saw, that the whole back was gone. He said brain tissue was coming out of the back of his head from the bullet, and going onto the floor there while they were working on him. Robert McClellan, who was standing at the head of the table, who's still alive, by the way, you might want to get him on your show too. He was looking at Kennedy's head wound for 30 minutes while they worked on him. He did nothing but hold a retractor the whole time, and so he had nothing but to do but look at the head wound. And he said, I got the best view of the head wound of any of the doctors, of anybody in the room. And there's no doubt about that head wound being an exit wound from the front. So, you've got to dispute all these doctors when you say, Oswald killed Kennedy. That's just ridiculous. I mean, the doctors can blow that away just by their own testimony. And a lot of the doctors were never called to testify before the Warren Commission, which is very unusual. Several of them did testify, but they certainly not all of them were called. That makes you wonder about that.
Well, Cyril Wecht has a lot of commentary about this. Now, did he actually he examine the autopsy report and photos and stuff like that?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yeah, he's done a lot of work on the case, and he would have been the perfect doctor to have done the autopsy. I mean, he's the best forensic pathologist in the country, and he's a leading critic of the whole thing, and with good reason. So I wish he'd done the autopsy. We wouldn't have all the questions that we have today.
Now, what about, I've heard a story, too, about how where somehow, some way, they manipulated his body in the casket on the plane.
Yes, that was David Lipton's theory, and I'm not saying he's wrong. He wrote a book called Best Evidence where he claims that there was some surgery done to Kennedy's head in between the time his body left Dallas and the time it arrived in Washington. I don't know if that's true or not. I'm not here to say yes or no. I don't know. All I know is what his research said. 2 FBI agents who looked at Kennedy's head wound at the Bethesda agreed that it looked like his head had been worked on or cut on prior to the autopsy starting on him. So, that's a good theory. It makes sense, but, there's nothing conclusive about it. That's the problem. We just don't know for sure.
Yeah, and so much time has passed. Now, have you heard it ever, do you think that we'll ever reopen this investigation?
Oh, that's a good question. I really sincerely doubt it because they've already reinvestigated this thing several times, and I don't think our government wants to touch it anymore. It's too much of a live cannon. Unless something comes out that, like a new film or something like in my fictional book, where a new film comes out that finally proves that there's more than one government. Unless we have some kind of photographic proof somewhere that's locked up that comes out that forces the government to do something, I really don't see any more investigations on this, unfortunately, which is a tragedy for the country because the United States deserves better than this. We should know the truth about this whole thing, and we still don't know the truth today.
Yeah, it seems like everybody does really know it. That it was I guess a coup or a conspiracy, a power grab. But you're right. Without a video or a picture, because that's what people nowadays can really absorb. Because we got all those statements. What do you think of all the statements made by Ruby and when he was sitting there in the jail in Dallas?
Right. Yeah. Well, Ruby is an interesting person because, of course, he's the one that killed Oswald on national TV on Sunday, November the 24th. Ruby was tied up with organized crime. There's no doubt about that. That's been conclusively proven beyond all doubt. He was mixed up with Al Capone as a young man in Chicago. That's where he came from originally. And Ruby told people when he was in Dallas that he'd been sent down to Dallas by the Chicago mob to run their operations in Dallas, gambling and things that they wanted to set up in the Dallas area. So that's why he was in Dallas to begin with. And he ran nightclubs, of course, down here in Dallas. And Ruby liked to brag about all the people he was familiar with and all the people that he knew. He knew, well over 100 police officers in the Dallas Police Department by first name. They would come into his clubs all the time. He'd treat them with food and drinks and strippers and things. And so he was a hanger-on. He knew the police department really well. That's why they didn't suspect anything when he was seen in the police department all during that weekend. Because I don't know if you're familiar with this or aware of this, but Ruby was at the midnight press conference Friday night when they brought Oswald down to be interviewed on national television. It was right around midnight Friday night after he was arrested. And Ruby was in the room at the back. He shouldn't have been in there because he wasn't a media person, but he got in there somehow. And then all day Saturday when they were transferring Oswald in between interviews and in between interrogations, you could see Ruby in the hallway up there when Oswald was being moved around. He apparently couldn't get close enough to Oswald to shoot him on Saturday, but he was up there. So he was following Oswald around the whole weekend. It wasn't like he just showed up Sunday morning for the first time and shot him. Now, of course, people like to say, well, Ruby wasn't part of a conspiracy. He just, got upset when he saw Oswald Sunday morning and just had the opportunity there and had a gun on him and just decided to kill the guy. Well, that's a nice, convenient story if you want to believe that, but the true facts don't tell that story because Ruby told his psychiatrist before he died that he was ordered to kill Oswald. He didn't say who ordered him to do it, but he said he was ordered to do it, and that's why he did it. He also said that there was a conspiracy that he killed the president, although he didn't know who did it. He hinted many times in interviews when they had him on videotape. He said that the people that put him in the position he was in are people high up in the government, and
right.
the truth will never come out.
Well, Jack, let's get to this after the break because we have the break coming up now.
Sure.
So just hold a couple minutes. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio.
Most guys freeze. That's your cerebral cortex looking for an answer it doesn't have.
See? Even your brain knows you're screwed.
The body's filling with adrenaline right now, whether you know it or not. Your heart's beating fast. It's getting a little harder to breathe. The neurobiological system is telling it to run, but your knees are too weak to move.
Fear is not real. The only place that fear can exist is in our thoughts of the future. It is a product of our imagination, causing us to fear things that do not at present and may not ever exist. That is near insanity. Do not misunderstand me. Danger is very real, but fear is a choice. We are all telling ourselves a story.
You're listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. 100% listener-supported radio. Reporting the danger. Unafraid. Right here, where information never sleeps. Revolution Radio.
Folks, join me, Terry Ackerman, also known as Lady Horse, every Sunday, 10 to 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time for A Touch of Country on Studio A. We have a variety of topics we discuss. We focus on country living, holistic healing, and self-reliance. I look forward to having you join us by listening in, calling in, or interacting into our chat room here at freedomslips.com. I can't wait to meet you.
Enjoy your extra big-ass fries.
You didn't give me no fries. I got an empty box.
Would you like another?
Extra big-ass fries.
I said I didn't get any.
Thank you. Your account has been charged. Your balance is 0. Please come back when you can afford to make a purchase.
No.
I'm sorry you're having
trouble.
Come
on. My kids are starving.
Thank you for tuning in to Revolution Radio. Here at Revolution Radio, we believe in freedom of ideas, freedom of speech, but above all, we believe in freedom of existence through self-reliance. This station is 100% listener-supported, and as a fundraising promotion, I have a kick-ass free gift for a $100 donation. 35,000 seeds. 25 years in the freezer. Long-term storable, 54 different varieties. So if food prices go crazy, the shit hits the fan, or if you just want to save tons of money every year by creating your own food like I do, grab our seed pack special. Just look for the banner on the homepage at freedomslips.com. Don't be a statistic. Don't be part of the problem. Be part of the solution. We need, as humans, to start taking care of ourselves and not depending on the megacorps to provide unhealthy, nasty food. Included in this package is also a DVD with 900 survival and off-grid living documents and the offline home canning how to do everything website all on the DVD. So when you're growing all that food, you know how to can it, store it, preserve it, etc. with all these documents. So thank you for tuning in to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. I hope that you will pick up this package and start learning to be free. Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, where information never sleeps and freedom is one seed that needs to be planted.
What we do in life, it goes in eternity.
You've just recreated the worst possible nightmare.
Fiscal year 1999, 2.3 trillion missing. Fiscal year 2000, 1.1 trillion missing.
You'd think with 2 mortgages out, the repo guy's staking out my car, my job on the line.
Even when we win, it's just a matter of time before we give it all back.
There are serious financial management problems.
Are we potentially at a point where we might actually lose the financial system as we know it?
And you're standing there and you suddenly realize, hey, I'm still here.
Don't be a victim of the current economic crisis. Turn the tables on the banksters, collection agencies, and other crooks. You can stress out trying to find a way to make the minimum payments every month, or you can get them to pay you. Join hosts Jesse and Dave every Monday at 12 p.m. Eastern Time for What Lies in Your Debt, right here on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. Where information never sleeps.
What do you think it is? I don't know. Whatever it is.
Welcome. Now, dare more, gentlemen.
Join me, Joe Kiernan, and Dr. J every Sunday from 10 p.m. Eastern to midnight for Researchers on a Mission Radio. We will be interviewing guests in ufology, experts on the paranormal, and stories from you, the listener. Every Sunday, 10 p.m. in Studio B. Join us for some amazing conversations and edge-of-your-seat true thrillers.
Right here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, Studio B, 10 p.m. Eastern Time, Sunday nights. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps. Revolution Radio. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Okay, welcome back to the Opperman Report. We got a guest on today, Jack Duffy. He's a trial lawyer from Fort Worth, Texas. JackDuffyLaw.com is his law firm's website. He's the author of the book, The Man from 2063. That's available on Amazon.com. The man is an encyclopedia of the JFK assassination. And he's also recommending a book by his friend here, Robert Grodin, called Absolute Proof, that's coming out soon. So keep those books on your radar, guys. This is really good stuff, and I definitely want to get Jack back on a future show. Now, Jack, I want to hit you with a couple of things here. One is, are you there, Jack?
I'm here.
Okay, good. Okay, now, we were talking about Jack Ruby in the police station right before he got shot. Now, what about that cop that was, you see that cop that was with a Stetson hat that was had Ruby by the arm when he was coming out? He seemed to be what's his name?
Jim Lavelle, the one in the white suit?
Right. Now, he was a big shot down there, but every other cop in those pictures was a bunch of rookies, no?
Well, Jim Lavelle was a veteran on the force. In fact, I met Jim Lavelle and talked with him myself.
Okay.
He believes Oswald was the only party involved in this, and I've kind of been amused by that because I can't believe he really believes that. But I think he's just getting his pension now, and I think he's scared to rock the boat. That's my personal opinion, why he's not willing to say anything else about it. But I don't think he seriously believes that Oswald was the only involved. That's what he tells people now when he's interviewed. But anyway, he was the one that was handcuffed to Oswald, standing on his right side, and the other detective, I forget his name, he's deceased now, but he was standing on the other side of Oswald.
Right. And pretty much every other cop there was like a rookie.
Pretty much, yeah. Those two guys were the veterans that were escorting Oswald.
Yeah.
But anyway, I was talking about Ruby again real quickly. Robert Groden, the photo expert I mentioned earlier, he has film proof. Of course, there's a theory going around by people who don't believe in a conspiracy to say that, well, it's not a theory, they can suppose it's fact, but they say that Ruby was wiring money to one of his strippers just like less than 2 minutes before he killed Oswald, and therefore there couldn't have been a conspiracy because he would not have known what was going on, or if he was going to, if it was premeditated in a conspiracy, he would have been down there more than 2 minutes ahead of time to make sure he didn't miss Oswald. So
right.
That's the story that, it wasn't a conspiracy. Well, the problem with that theory or story is that even if that's true, number one, we don't know for a fact that it was really Ruby that wired the money for sure.
True.
Somebody said he was Jack Ruby that was wiring the money, so it could have been an imposter for all we know. The mob, in fact, used that kind of trick many times in their history where they would have a guy pose as somebody, and then the real guy would be somewhere else killing someone, and that would give him an alibi. So that's an old mafia trick where they would have a double or an imposter set something up to create an alibi like that. Now, I'm not saying that's what they did here, but it's very possible that could have been done with Ruby. But Groden can destroy that theory because he has a film from NBC cameraman down in the basement that show Ruby down there more than 2 minutes earlier than that, waiting in the basement for Oswald, because you can tell Ruby was the only one that wore the kind of hat he had on when he shot Oswald, and you can tell he sticks out in the crowd, and he's already down there 10, 15 minutes before Oswald's brought down. So he obviously wasn't wiring money to a stripper if he's down there 15 minutes before waiting for Oswald.
Okay, but what about, didn't Ruby have his dogs in the car?
Yes, that again goes to the story that he loved his dogs so much he would never let his dogs in the car if he knew he was going to kill Oswald and get arrested. But I mean, I don't know if you want to believe that, that's fine. But
I don't know.
I mean, I'm not sure. You know, when the mafia tells you to kill somebody, and that's what I think happened here. Because the mob was connected with Ruby. Ruby was receiving phone calls from high-level mafia people weeks before the assassination. That's been documented by the House Committee. They tracked where the phone calls came from. Now, they don't know what the conversations were about, but high-level mafia people were talking to Ruby weeks before Kennedy was killed for some reason, and the calls kept getting more frequent and it kept escalating the closer it got to the assassination. So he was receiving a lot of phone calls in the days leading up to the assassination from people in organized crime. You know, why would they be calling Ruby for it? It's never been disclosed.
What do you know about the shooting of Officer Tippit?
Well, that's an interesting deal too. Of course, everybody knows, or maybe some people don't know, that the reason why Oswald was arrested that day was not for killing Kennedy, it was for killing Tippit.
Right.
Tippit was a Dallas police officer who was killed about 45 minutes after Kennedy was killed in Oak Cliff, which is a suburb of Dallas. The theory, or the Warren Commission theory on this, because I call it a theory, is that Oswald went to his rooming house. He left the book depository after the shooting of Kennedy, which is, I agree, suspicious. People normally don't leave the scene of a crime unless they're involved in it, but that doesn't mean Oswald killed Kennedy. Besides, one other person left the building too besides Oswald. You don't hear about that. You just hear it's Oswald was the only one that left. That's not true. Another worker left too. But Oswald was the one that ended up getting focused on. So Oswald left the building. He goes, gets a taxi, takes it to his rooming house, and gets a windbreaker and a pistol, which is suspicious. I'm not going to deny that. He got a pistol and put it in his pants, and then he left the rooming house, and his landlady saw him leave. And then Tippit gets killed at 1:15. Well, the Warren Commission, of course, said that Oswald was the one that killed Tippit. And the reason why they believe that is because they say that there were several witnesses that supposedly picked Oswald or saw Oswald do it, but a lot of these witnesses later changed their story or weren't sure what they saw. I tend to believe that Oswald, I don't think Oswald killed Tippit, and I'll tell you why.
Okay.
Number one, excuse me, there's some doubt about whether or not he could have even been there in time to kill Tippit. For one thing, they did a documentary on Oswald where he left his rooming house, and they had a man pose as Oswald, the same height, same weight, same everything as Oswald. And this man was timed from where he left the rooming house of Oswald, and he got to where Tippit was killed, and they did a time test of this thing, and they proved that even at walking at a fast pace, that the guy that they had impersonating Oswald in the test couldn't even get there in time to kill Tippit. There's just no way he could get there on foot quick enough, unless he was given a ride by somebody, and there's no evidence that he was given a lift or a ride from anybody. So whether or not Oswald could have even gotten there in time is number one, a big question mark. Number two, Aquila Clemens was a key eyewitness who Mark Lane, the famous researcher, interviewed about the Tippit shooting. She claimed and told Lane that 2 people killed Tippit, not one, and that neither one of them was Oswald. She was threatened by the Dallas police right after she said that. They came and visited her at her home there in Oak Cliff and told her if she didn't shut up, she'd be killed. This is what she told Mark Lane.
Well, let me ask you this. I interrupt. What is your theory of why they killed Tippit?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know if it was part of the conspiracy with Kennedy or if it was just an independent act. A lot of people think that Tippit was sent out to kill Oswald, and then Oswald killed him first. Other people believe that Tippit was set up by the conspiracy and then was killed by members of the conspiracy to frame Oswald further. There's all sorts of theories about what happened. What I know is that it's not conclusive by any means that Oswald killed him.
Right.
There's more reasons why I want to get into here about why there's doubt about that. They found 4 different types of shell casings at the scene where Tippit was killed. 2 were from an automatic and 2 were from a revolver. First of all, Oswald had a revolver, not an automatic. So where did the automatic shells come from? They've never explained that to this day. If there were 2 shooters, that would explain it. But it doesn't explain where 2 automatic shells were there at the scene. The bullets that went into Tippit's body, they never could ballistically match them to Oswald's revolver. To this day, they've never been able to do that. So we don't know for sure if they really came from Oswald's pistol. People that saw the shooting, several could not identify Oswald at a police lineup later that afternoon, yet they were supposedly close enough to see the person that killed him, but they couldn't identify Oswald in the lineup. So that's suspicious. One person who said that one person that I forget his name, that was interviewed about the Tippit shooting. He said that the person that killed Tippit was not Oswald, and he got shot at later on, and after he was shot at and they missed him, he changed his story and said, oh, by the way, it was Oswald. Now my memory got refreshed all of a sudden. So he changed his story, so he's not credible. Lately, new evidence has come out that proves that that Oswald went into the Texas theater, and a guy that worked in the theater was supposedly told investigators that he was selling popcorn to Oswald in the theater around 1:15, and that's the exact time that Tippit was getting shot. So now, this is why the case is so fascinating, because there's so many different conflicting things on this, on both killings, that nothing's really clear cut on anything. That's the big problem with the whole case. Evidence points to Oswald in some areas, and evidence points to other people in other areas. So.
Yeah, and even because they throw in so many curveballs and so many disinfo agents in the mix. There's just so many people in there. So just because a guy was shot at and changed his story, who knows? The first story could have been fake. There's just no way. There's too much confusion.
Yeah, one of the witnesses that said it was Oswald said that she was talking to Tippit while he was on the ground. Well, that's impossible because Tippit was dead already. He was hit in the head.
Yeah.
And the autopsy report said he was dead on impact. So that lady couldn't even be telling the truth. It said she was talking to him.
Yeah, you got to be careful with witnesses too. Let me ask you a question now. Are you familiar with a guy named Peter Levenda?
Peter Levenda?
Yeah.
The name doesn't sound familiar.
Okay, because are you familiar with that David Ferry and Guy Bannister and a lot of these guys, that they were all... Yeah. But wait a second. They were members of an Orthodox church where they were all bishops in this church?
Well, Ferry was was trying to be a priest and got defrocked because he was homosexual.
Right.
I don't know about the other guy that you're talking about. I've never heard of him before.
Guy Bannister.
Oh, Bannister I've heard of, yeah. That's this Peter guy I've never heard of. Yeah. Yeah, Bannister was a detective down in New Orleans that Oswald was mailing pamphlets out that had Guy Bannister's address in the pamphlet.
Well, you might. Let me interrupt you for a second. You might want to look into this because Peter Levin is like a researcher kind of guy, and he lived next door to this Orthodox Catholic church, and half of those guys that are involved, Guy Bannister was a bishop in this church, and so was David Ferry.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's true. Yeah, I knew Ferry was in the Catholic Church. I didn't know about Bannister, but Bannister they never did an interview. By the way, his files got taken away by the FBI, and
right.
They say we don't know what's in those files. and they never even interviewed Bannister before he died. So that's another loose end that we don't know anything about.
Yeah, and of course, Guy Bannister had an office that was right next door to Fair Play for Cuba. Yeah, I think they both had the same space but different entrances.
Right. You want to talk? I'd like to talk about Oswald's marksmanship for a minute, if you have time too.
No, I want you to take this where you want to. You got this down, yeah.
One of the big controversies about this whole Kennedy thing has always been, was Oswald that good of a shot, or was he had the capability as a sniper to pull it off with the kind of gun that they found on the sixth floor, the 6.5 Mannlicher Carcano rifle? My opinion is that a lot of other people, the majority of the people that have studied the case, tend to believe that Oswald did not have the ability to pull it off because he wasn't that good of a shot, number one, and the rifle was a very poor quality weapon to begin with. They interviewed a lot of Marines that served with Oswald when he was in the Marine Corps, and every Marine that saw Oswald shoot in the service, every one of them said that he was a horrible shot, that his marksmanship was a joke. In fact, one of the Marines said that if I was going to pick somebody in the United States to shoot me, I'd pick Oswald because that's how bad a shot he was. They said that Oswald couldn't even hit the targets, the still targets, not moving targets, but the stationary targets on the right range. He couldn't even hit the target at all. He would miss the target completely. That he was very uncoordinated, didn't know how to handle the rifle well. So there you have evidence from all these Marines that saw him shoot that said there's no way in the world he could have killed Kennedy because he couldn't even hit a target on the rifle range. They've had other experts, snipers, who are much better shots than Oswald, try to recreate the assassination to see if it was possible for them to do it. And Carlos Hathcock, who was the instructor for the Marine Sniper School at Quantico, Virginia, he was the top military sniper, the top sniper in the world for that matter at one time. He recreated the whole Kennedy assassination himself. He fired the same kind of weapon that Oswald was using, from the same height, the same distance, firing at a moving target going the same speed as Kennedy's car, and he couldn't even do what Oswald supposedly did. And he was a top sniper in the country. He said this guy could not have killed Kennedy because I couldn't even do it. Jesse Ventura, the former governor of Minnesota, who's a Navy SEAL, he was an expert marksman at one time. He tried to do it also with Oswald's rifle, the same kind of test, but he couldn't do it either. I mean, for one thing, the rifle that was found on the sixth floor, the bolt jammed or was hard to pull back, number one, because Robert Frazier was the FBI expert who test fired Oswald's weapon. Now, this is the actual murder weapon itself. Nobody else has ever been allowed to use that weapon to recreate it because it's in the National Archives. So the only true test would be to use the actual weapon, not one like it. But we can't use the real weapon, so we have to use weapons like it to test. But Frazier tested the actual weapon itself, and he told the Warren Commission that the scope was misaligned. It was off-center, number one, which would mean that you couldn't hit the target accurately. He also said the bolt was hard to pull back and recycle the weapon, which makes it even harder to fire shots rapidly like that back-to-back. The trigger was hard to pull back, he said. He said there were lots of problems with the gun. He said, I could not even do what Oswald did, and he was the top marksman for the FBI. And here's the FBI's own expert marksman testifying to this in front of the Warren Commission that he couldn't even do what Oswald did.
Well, then why would they? Okay, obviously Oswald was set up; he was a patsy. But then why would they set him up with a decent rifle that could do the job?
That's a good question. You would think they'd pick a better weapon, but of course Oswald supposedly ordered this Mannlicher Carcano mail, which doesn't make any sense. Number one, because if you're gonna kill somebody with a weapon, why would you mail order where they can trace it back to you? Back in '63, Oswald could have walked into any gun store in Dallas and just bought the gun with no questions asked and not even leaving his name behind, and they never would have been able to trace the gun to him. But no, he's going to leave the gun up there, number one, because he's so smart. He's going to kill Kennedy, leave the gun where the police are going to find it. By the way, they didn't find any of Oswald's fingerprints on the gun. I don't know if you're aware of that, but they never did find any fingerprints on the gun that matched Oswald, which is unusual if he fired it. Also, they did a paraffin test. They also did a paraffin test on Oswald's face. A paraffin test is where they put wax on your face to see if there's any gunpowder residue from firing a rifle. And that gun that they found on the sixth floor, they tested it, and it does leave gunpowder on the shooter's face. But when they tested Oswald, there's no gunpowder on his face, so they can't explain that. If he killed Kennedy, why is there no gunpowder on his face?
Or if he killed Kennedy.
Right.
Yeah.
So here they need this weapon up there. Whoever framed Oswald, they had to use the weapon that he ordered, of course, because if they picked another weapon, it wouldn't match up to Oswald. So they had to leave a trail that went right back to Oswald. So I think that's why they used that weapon, hoping that the public would buy that baloney. That well, this weapon's good enough to shoot and kill somebody. I mean, yeah, if he fired just maybe one shot and it was a lucky shot, maybe he did kill Kennedy. But there were more than three shots that were fired in rapid succession. So there's no way that weapon could have done that.
What do you think about the photo of Oswald holding the rifle?
I'm glad you brought that up. That's a really interesting thing. To this day, there's still controversy about whether or not those photos are legitimate. Oswald, when they showed the pictures to Oswald when he was being interrogated, he told Captain Will Fritz, that the photos were fake, that the pictures were a composite, that somebody had taken a picture of his face and superimposed it over another man's body, that was not him in the pictures. Now, I talked to the Marina myself, like I mentioned earlier when I interviewed her, and I asked her if she took those photographs, and she told me she did. But then she's changed her story over the years, too, about when she took them, what day she took them, lots of things that she said that she's changed her story around. So I don't necessarily believe that she took those exact pictures. She might have taken other pictures of Oswald, but not maybe those. I tend to believe the pictures are fake for a lot of reasons. Number one, I've talked to a lot of experts in photography, and the House committee, of course, said they were legitimate. They had their own panel of experts, paid experts, that said, oh, yeah, these are legitimate pictures, but there's a lot of problems with those photos to make me think that that's not the situation. Robert Groden, like I said, is a photographic expert. That's why you need to get him on your show. He did work with the committee, and he disagreed with their conclusion. He told me how they were able to do those photos and make the composites. He told me how easy it was to do it, and that he has evidence that that's exactly what happened. You'll need to talk to him more about that because he knows more about it than I do. But he explained it to me over in Dealey Plaza several months ago about how he thought it was done and why he could prove it was done.
Well, the thing is, even though it's simple, now we know it's simple. But at the time, it wasn't common knowledge that kind of thing could be done. And it's the first thing that Oswald said out of his mouth. Hey, that's a composite. It's a stage photo. Like, how would he know? It wasn't common knowledge back in those days.
Well, I mean, if Oswald didn't look at the guy in the picture, he had to have known that somebody had framed him, that he was being set up, because he said it wouldn't even me. That's not even me in the picture. That's my face, but that's not my body.
Right.
But what's interesting about the rifle that's in the photographs is longer than the rifle that was found on the 6th floor. They measured it on the photo, and they can tell the distance because of the way they measure it from the photograph. And the rifle that the man that's supposed to be Oswald in the picture that he's holding is not the same rifle that was found on the 6th floor. That's number one. It's kind of screwy to be with. Oswald doesn't have a wedding ring on. The man in the photo has a wedding ring on. Oswald didn't wear a wedding ring. Oswald didn't have any shirts like the man in the photo's wearing. He didn't have a black shirt like that, short sleeve shirt like the man in the photo's wearing. Marina never saw him have a shirt like that. The shadows in the photos don't add up, number one. First of all, the experts have looked it up. There was a series of 3 pictures, not just one. There's 3 photographs of Oswald supposedly standing there posing. In every picture, the head of the man's head, which is Oswald's face, is stationary. It doesn't move at all in all 3 pictures, and yet the body shifts or is not in the same position in all 3 photos, which is impossible if it's the same person in each photograph. That's more evidence that there's some fakery involved there. The shadows don't match up. The shadow of the man goes at an angle behind his body, but the shadow on his face goes right beneath his nose, which means the sun's shining at 2 different places, which is impossible. The day that Marina said she took the pictures, the weather was. Are you there? No.
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah. The day that Marina Oswald testified, she took the pictures. It was in March. I forget the exact date, but the day she told them she took the photographs, they checked the weather report that day in Dallas. In the photographs, it's a bright, sunny day. The day that she took those pictures, that she told the Warren Commission, the weather was rainy and cloudy. The sun wasn't even out on those days. So either she's got the date wrong or the photos are fake.
Well, this is great. I had no idea all this information about these photos. But let me ask you this then. Then the question is, okay, obviously the photos are fake. Who produced the photos? Who obtained the photos? And then who released them? Was it the FBI or local cops?
Yeah, that's another interesting thing, how the photos were found. They found the pictures. Oswald told them where he was staying, that he was staying at Ruth Payne's home. And he told them, that that's where his belongings were. So, of course, they went over there and searched everything, and lo and behold, they found these 3 incriminating pictures of him holding a gun there. So that makes you wonder, why would a guy who's just killed the president, if he was the one that did it, why would he tell the police where to go find incriminating photos? Why is he going to leave incriminating photos laying around for the police to find, number one? That doesn't make any sense. If I'm going to kill somebody, I'm not going to take pictures of myself or have somebody take pictures of me holding a murder weapon and then leave the pictures at my house for the police to find. If you're going to do that, you might as well confess to the crime. And, of course, Oswald never confessed to anything. That's another reason why I think it was a setup. Somebody planted those pictures in that garage is what I believe. That's what a lot of researchers believe, that they were left there on purpose to frame Oswald so the police would find them.
Yeah, I recall something about that, too. Now, maybe there was something about a toolbox in the garage as well? No?
I hadn't heard about a toolbox. supposedly that's where the rifle was being kept that was found on the 6th floor. Oh, one thing I want to get into since we're talking about the rifle, I've interviewed Bill Frazier. He's another witness I've interviewed. Bill Frazier was the guy that drove Oswald to the school book depository the morning of the assassination. Oswald didn't know how to drive, so he had to always get transportation to get to work. And Frazier and he worked together in the book depository. They were the same age, and they did the same job. They filled book orders at the depository. And Frazier was his closest friend. Oswald didn't communicate or really have anything to do with anybody else that he worked with except for Bill Frazier. He was the only person that he really talked to much. And Bill Frazier told me he's a great guy. Bill is. He's interesting to talk with. And I believe everything he says today. He's still alive, by the way, and he's writing a book, too, about his experience with Oswald. He told me that Oswald put a package in the back seat of his car that morning when he drove him to work. He got a good look at the package, and it was about 2 feet long, as he estimated. It was no more than 2 feet long. The murder weapon that was found, or the rifle that was found on the 6th floor that supposedly killed Kennedy, when they take it apart, it's more than 2 feet long. It's like 3 feet long. So if that was the gun that killed Kennedy, it wasn't in that package, because Frazier said there's no way that package was long enough to have a gun in it. Oswald said it was curtain rods when he asked him what was in the package.
Right.
Oswald, in fact, had a room that needed curtains, by the way. So possibly Oswald was telling the truth there when he said it was curtain rods. He said the way Oswald carried the package is also interesting. Oswald took the package out of the car when they got to the depository, and he put the one end of the package under his right armpit and put the other end cupped in his right hand. So the package was short enough for it to fit between his armpit and his hand. The rifle that killed Kennedy you can't fit it under your armpit and in your hand. It's too long. So that's another reason why I don't believe it was the rifle that killed Kennedy that he brought into the building, like the Warren Commission said.
Did the curtain rods ever turn up?
I'm sorry?
The curtain rods, did they ever turn up, show up anywhere?
They didn't find any curtain rods. I mean, I'll admit that, but, who knows?
Who knows?
But that doesn't mean they weren't there. I just don't know. I mean, it doesn't prove anything necessarily one way or the other. But one thing about what Frazier told me was interesting about Oswald is that Frazier was standing on the front steps of the book depository when the assassination happened. He saw Kennedy's car go right by, and he heard the gunshots go off. And he told me that 2 of the shots came from above, from the window above in the building, but at least one shot, he said, came from the railroad track or the grassy knoll area. The last shot, he said, he felt came from way down the street from the grassy knoll area where all the witnesses said the sniper was located. So here's another witness who told me that he said there were at least 3 for sure, maybe 4 shots that were fired that he heard for sure, and that the last shot came from way down from the street, not from the depository.
And the grassy knoll area, that area was like swarmed with Dallas cops and guys alleged Secret Service agents.
Yeah, the first police officer that ran up there seconds after it happened was Joe Smith, and he confronted a man right behind the picket fence who was dressed with an overcoat, and he had a sports shirt on and a sport pants on, and the man pulled out a Secret Service badge and said, "I'm a Secret Service agent, officer, and I'm up here trying to investigate this thing." And the officer didn't question him or say anything to him. He just said, "Okay, fine," and left him alone. He didn't have any reason to disbelieve him. The problem is that the man was an imposter, because all the legitimate Secret Service agents went to the hospital with Kennedy. They didn't stay behind in Dealey Plaza. So whoever this guy was, he wasn't a real Secret Service agent. So that's very interesting. Who was this guy?
Okay, got a break coming up. My guest today is Jack Duffy, trial lawyer from Fort Worth, Texas, author of the book, The Man from 2063. We'll be back in a couple of minutes.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
He wants a challenge. Let's give him one.
The voice that whispers in your ears are the screams that you fear. The mind you cannot defy is the heart that rules mankind. The people who made you are the gods that will save you. I am Steve Travesty. I am the voice. The ghost in the machine. Ghost in the Machine, Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern, Studio B.
Right here, Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, where information never sleeps.
What are we supposed to do?
I'm gonna fight, because I'm used to it. The rest of you are gonna have a tougher choice. And look, I don't want to sell it to you. It's too ugly for that. And it's ugly, and it's hard. But when you're fighting in your own backyard, you're fighting for your family, it all hurts a little less and it makes a little more sense. But for us, this is our home. Even the tiniest flea can drive a big dog crazy. So the first thing we have to do is learn how to work together. Become a unit. And that's going to take some time. So we're going to have to evolve. Rewire our reflexes. Learn new skills and adapt old ones. So we'll find people we can trust. Friends with their ears to the ground who can help us get the things we need to fight back. Watch what they do. Study their tactics, their routines. The more we know, the easier it will be to hurt them. But we'll need to be smart, and we'll need to be patient. We'll hit them on our terms. When we're good and ready. We inherited our freedom. Now it's up to all of us to fight for it.
Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, where the fight begins and information never sleeps.
There is no good and evil. There is only power. And those too weak to seek it.
This is the people's war. It is our war. We are the fighters. Fight it then. Fight it with all that is in us. And may God defend the right.
Be sure to tune in weekdays 5 to 7 p.m. Eastern Time for Strange Universe with Sean David Morton. The strange, interesting, and engaging wide variety of topics. So be here. Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com.
I would like, if I may, to take you on a strange journey.
Revolution Radio. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Okay, welcome back to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Ed Opperman. We have with us today Fort Worth, Texas attorney Jack Duffy, JackDuffyLaw.com. He's the author of the book, The Man from 2063, which is available on Amazon. We've only got a half hour left. I'm going to beg this guy to come back. We got some great. I'm telling you, Jack, I'm gonna stalk you, brother. You're going to get a restraining order against me.
Well, I've got a list of several things I want to hit on before we, in the last 30 minutes, if we can.
Go.
Number one, first of all, my website is Jack G. Duffy Law. I'm sorry, it's not J. It's JackGDuffyLaw.com.
I'm sorry.
Anyway, one thing I wanted to point out that's interesting that proves a conspiracy is that 2 days before Kennedy was shot, on November the 20th, 1963, there was an incident that took place, and the House committee found out about this. That's why we know it happened. Two Dallas police officers were on routine patrol, and they were driving down Elm Street, which is the street that Kennedy was killed on 2 days later, and they were driving right down in front of the grassy knoll. This is the Wednesday before it happened, and they noticed two men behind the picket fence there on the knoll. Both of the men were dressed in suits and ties, dark suits and ties like government people just wear, and they both had high-powered rifles with telescopic sights on the rifles, pointing the rifles down at the plaza.
Wow.
And the two police officers stopped their car and ran up the hill to confront these guys to see what they were doing, if there were guns. And the men saw the policemen and ran off and got in the car and drove off so the cops could get to them. The police officers made a report that afternoon about the incident, and they gave it to their superiors. And then after Kennedy was killed 2 days later, that report just got buried. The FBI had a hold of it, or got a hold of it, and they buried it. And then the House committee found out about it and got it from the FBI for the first time in the mid-'70s. So it's interesting that report got buried for 12 years because, how do you explain an incident like that? If there's no conspiracy, what are these men doing up there in the exact spot where a sniper kills Kennedy 2 days later, firing in the same location? if it's an innocent, situation, how do you explain that? That's
Yeah, and I've never heard that before. That's gold.
Yeah, it's interesting. Also, I wanted to talk about Julia Mercer for a minute. Julia Mercer was a key witness. I've never interviewed her, but she's still alive. She was driving down Elm Street the morning of the day it happened, November 22nd, on her way to work, and she got caught in a traffic jam right there in Diddy Plaza because of Kennedy's motorcade. And she testified to the Warren Commission and to the House Committee, and she also testified in Jim Garrison's trial in New Orleans that she's never changed her story in 50 years. She said that she was stuck in traffic, and there was a green pickup parked next to her on the parked illegally up on the curb, and two men were in the truck. Both of them were dressed in coats and ties. And the passenger got out and picked up a hunting rifle case that you carry a hunting rifle in, and walked up the hill behind the picket fence. And she didn't know what was going on. She thought maybe he's a Secret Service guy or something. And the driver was looking at her, giving her kind of a dirty look, like, "What are you staring at, lady?" And then she drove off. And she got a good look at the driver because he was very close to her. And then
Jack, people are asking you to speak up a little bit. Can you put your mouth a little closer to the mouth? Yeah.
Sure. When Ruby, can you hear me?
Yeah, great.
When Ruby killed Oswald on Sunday, November 24th, Julia Mercer saw Ruby on TV, and she told the Warren Commission and all the other committees that she testified before that the man that was staring at her that was driving that pickup that morning was Jack Ruby, because she got a good look at his face. Now, if she's correct, and she's gone into hiding because she's fearful for her life. I understand she lives in seclusion now. But she told everybody that was Ruby that dropped that man off several hours before the assassination. So it's just another interesting tidbit that I wanted to bring to the audience's attention that shows that maybe Ruby was part of the plot.
Yeah, I never heard that one either.
There's another incident that's important I want to talk about while we have time. This also proves a conspiracy overwhelmingly. There was a woman named Sylvia Odio who was a Cuban refugee who is still alive today. She still lives in Dallas today. I've never interviewed her, unfortunately, but I'd like to meet her. She's testified before the Warren Commission, the House Committee, and other committees. She's never changed her story in 50 years. Her story is that late September of 1963, she was living in Dallas. She was a refugee from Cuba, and three strange men showed up unannounced at her doorstep. She had never seen these men before. She didn't know why they showed up at her doorstep. To this day, she still doesn't know, but she thinks it's connected with a conspiracy. Two of the men were Cubans, and one was an American. And her sister was in the apartment there with her, and her sister saw the whole incident, so her sister has verified that all this did, in fact, take place, that she's not making this up. She didn't let the men into her apartment, of course, she didn't know who they were, but she talked to them through her door. She opened the door and talked to them through the crack in the door, and she saw all three of the men's faces because it was at night, but she had a porch light on that lit up their faces so she could see all of them very clearly. And the leader of the group said his name was Leopoldo, and he introduced his friend as Angelo, and then they introduced the American as Leon, not Lee, but Leon Oswald. And she remembered the name very distinctly. And Oswald didn't say anything. He just stood there the whole time while the Cubans did all the talking. And the Cuban guy told her, "Well, we're from this group that's trying to raise money to fight Castro, and we know you're from Cuba, and can you help us out?" And this and that and the other. And she said, "Well, I don't have any money. I'm sorry." And that was pretty much the end of the conversation. And then she closed the door and they left. Well, what's interesting about this is that the next night, this Cuban guy, the leader, Leopoldo, called her on the telephone. And she said, hello. And he said, "You remember me from last night?" And she said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, what did you think about our friend Oswald?" And he brought up Oswald. And she said, "Well, I don't know anything about him." And the guy goes on and says, "Well, this guy Oswald, he's a Yankee. He's an expert shot with a rifle," which he wasn't, by the way. He's also loco. He's kind of crazy. And he said we Cubans didn't have any guts, that we should have killed Kennedy after the Bay of Pigs. And then he hung up the phone. And she kind of got scared, because this guy was talking about killing Kennedy. And she didn't think any more about it or say anything about it because she didn't really think it was that big a deal. Then, of course, when Oswald was arrested on the day of the assassination, she saw Oswald on TV, and she tells the same story that she said that man was Lee Harvey Oswald that they introduced to me. He was standing there with those two Cubans. I got a good look at his face, and I don't forget a face. That was Lee Harvey Oswald that they introduced to me. So if she's correct, and nobody in 50 years has been able to discredit her at all, ever. Her story has stood the test of time. I have no reason to believe she's lying. Every investigator believes she's telling the truth. Even the people who believe Oswald killed Kennedy have a hard time explaining her away. Because if there's no conspiracy, then how do you explain these guys with Oswald several weeks before it happened talking about killing Kennedy with Oswald with them?
Incredible.
And then while we still have time, I wanted to talk about some of the strange deaths that have occurred over the years that people are familiar with. There's a new book that came out recently called Hit List. You ought to get it. It's pretty interesting. It talks about 78 people who died under strange circumstances who were connected with the Kennedy assassination. And there's a couple I want to talk about real quickly. William Pitzer was one of the most important witnesses who died very mysteriously. He was the naval commander who took the autopsy photographs and x-rays of John F. Kennedy the night of the autopsy at Bethesda. He was the naval commander who was in charge of that. He kept a 16-millimeter film of the autopsy that he made in his laboratory where he worked. Pitzer told his family the next day after the autopsy that Kennedy had been killed by a conspiracy because he saw the wounds on Kennedy's body, and he said, they're not telling us the truth, that they're lying about this whole thing. It wasn't just one guy, it was more than one person that killed him. And he was visited very shortly after by the CIA at his home, and he was told not to talk about the autopsy, or he would be court-martialed, and who else? No telling what else they would do to him. They didn't say they would kill him, but it was a veiled threat. And so he got scared, and so he didn't say a whole lot. The reason why his death is important is because right before he was about to leave the Navy, he had told his family he was going to go public with the film that he had of the autopsy, and that the military couldn't do anything to him once he was out of the military. Well, right before he was about to get out of the Navy, he ended up dead in his laboratory from a supposed self-inflicted gunshot to the head. The problem with all this is that the gun that they found that was in his right hand, Pitzer was left-handed, number one. The gun was in his right hand. His family said, we know he didn't commit suicide. We know he was murdered because of the Kennedy thing, because he'd been warned, not to talk about it. So they never believed that he committed suicide. The film that he took, the 16-millimeter film, disappeared from his lab after his body was found. So, somebody took the film, obviously, whoever killed him. But they staged it to look like a suicide. And the reason why we know it was a fake suicide is because they told the author that he was approached by a CIA guy that he had done work for in Vietnam. And this Green Beret had killed several Vietnamese during the war for the CIA. He was a trained assassin, special forces. And he told James Douglas, the author of this book, that the CIA guy that had given these other assignments walked up to him and said, we need you to kill another person for us. This time it's an American, not a Vietnamese. And he was suspicious about the fact that this was an American. He had never killed an American before on orders from the CIA. But he said, I don't want to kill any Americans, so I don't want to do it. And he refused to do it. But the guy told him, this guy's William Pitzer, that's his name, this is who we want you to kill. And he asked, well, what's the significance? Why does this guy need to be killed? And they wouldn't tell him why they wanted him dead. They just said, we need him to be eliminated. And he didn't say anything about it because he didn't know who Pitzer was, and that was the end of it. Well, 40 years later, he saw a documentary on the assassination, and he saw Pitzer in the documentary about what had happened to him. And he told the author that the CIA had Pitzer killed because I was ordered to kill him myself, and I refused to do it. So I know good and well he didn't commit suicide. It's really fascinating.
Yeah, it is. What else you got?
Dorothy Kilgallen is another strange death. She was the only person, she's a very well-known New York Times reporter, a celebrity. She got the only private interview with Jack Ruby ever. And we don't know to this day what Ruby told her, because it was just her and Ruby alone in a room. She came out after the interview and told her friends that she was going to blow the Kennedy assassination wide open, that she knew who had killed Kennedy, or she got information about who was behind it. Supposedly Ruby told her stuff that nobody else knew about. And before she could write her book and get her information out, she died all of a sudden in her apartment in Manhattan from a drug overdose, an alleged drug overdose. People say, that they don't believe she committed suicide. They think that she was killed by the CIA or somebody and made it look like a suicide. So that's another interesting, strange death. There's so many other ones. Real quickly, Sam Giancana, who was the head of the mob in Chicago, who had made threats against Kennedy's life, he was about to be brought to Washington, D.C. in the 70s to testify for the House Committee, and then he was assassinated in his home by the mob. They killed him just weeks before he was going to be brought to Washington and shot him in his home. Johnny Roselli, who was a CIA guy, also a mobster, had bragged about how the CIA and the mob had teamed up to kill Kennedy. He had already talked about it. In the mid-'70s, he was killed by the mob in Miami before he could be brought to Washington. They were just about to subpoena him and bring him up there. And then all of a sudden he was killed and dumped in the bay. They chopped him up in pieces and dumped him in the bay in Miami. So they got rid of him. And then Charles Nicoletti, who was a hitman for Giancana, who was rumored to have been in Dallas on the day of the assassination, he was being subpoenaed to Washington to testify, and the mob killed him in a parking lot in Chicago. So all three of these men were killed right before they were going to be brought to Washington to testify.
What about Tony Provenzano?
I don't know if he was involved or not. I don't know what role, if any, he might have played in this, so I really can't comment about him.
Okay, then keep going.
So many other, of course, strange deaths. A guy named Jack Zangretti was a mobster, and the day after the assassination, he had told people, he was working at a mob casino in Oklahoma, he told people that a man named Ruby was going to kill Oswald tomorrow and shut him up. And sure enough, Ruby killed Oswald the following day, and then Zangretti was murdered a week later and found in the lake there with bullet holes in him. so the mob killed him right after he talked too much. There's so many. I mean, there's like 78 people who died suspiciously over about a 15-year period. David Ferry was another key witness in New Orleans. He was portrayed in the movie JFK by that actor Joe Pesci.
Right.
Ferry was the guy that we talked about earlier. He knew Oswald personally, and Garrison was about to bring him in to force him to testify at his trial, and all of a sudden David Ferry ended up dead of alleged suicide. He was found dead in his apartment in New Orleans right before Jim Garrison could get him into court. And his death is extremely suspicious because Ferry left 2 suicide notes in his apartment, and all the notes, both of the notes were typed on a typewriter. They were not handwritten like most people write a suicide note. They don't type it up most of the time. They sign it and write it. And the signature was typed on there also. So that's another strange guy. There's just a lot of people that died suspiciously. Even Ruby's death is considered suspicious by some researchers because Ruby came down with lung cancer all of a sudden.
What do you think about the name Gordon Novell?
Gordon who?
Gordon Novell.
Was that the guy who did that mention to Kennedy? Is that who you're talking about?
No, supposedly he was an investigator for Garrison down there in New Orleans, and then he was informing to Johnson about everything that was going on in the investigation. You familiar with that?
Okay, well, I didn't know about that, so that's something I didn't know about. So that's interesting.
Okay, well, let's keep going with what you got. We only have a few minutes. What do you got?
Yeah, I want to talk about the single bullet theory for just a minute.
Sure.
That's the theory that one bullet went through both Kennedy and Connolly, and that's the crux of the Warren Commission's conclusion. Well, James Tague. Oh, forgot about James Tague. He's another witness that I've interviewed. He's a good friend of mine. James Tague was the man who was struck by a piece of the curb from a stray bullet that was fired at the motorcade. One of the bullets missed the car completely and hit the curb, and the piece of the curb flew up and hit James Tague in the face. So James Tague became a very important witness in this case. Mr. Tague's a good man. He's a good friend of mine, and he's coming out with a new book. And he told me and many other people over the years that he heard 4 clear shots for sure, and that the last one came from the grassy knoll. He was standing right under the triple underpass. Well, the importance of this is that our inspector came up with this theory that because they found 3 shell casings on the 6th floor, they had to assume that 3 bullets were fired by whoever shot the rifle. Therefore, they couldn't say that there were more shots because they only had 3 shells to match up, or else there had to be another gunman, and they didn't want to say that. So they had to make all the wounds fit into 3 shots. Well, the problem is that one of the shots missed the car, so now you have only 2 shots left to account for all the damage to the victims. Well, the only way to do that, because one shot hit Kenny in the head, so that left 1 bullet to do all the rest of the damage. Well, the only way they could make this work is to say that 1 bullet hit both men. And that's where they came up with the crazy single bullet magic bullet theory, is what the researchers call it now, because it's a ridiculous theory, and it's been disproven now by science. But John Connolly, who was wounded with Kennedy, who was hit by this supposed same bullet, he never agreed with the Warren Commission that 1 bullet hit both him and Kennedy. He never agreed to that. He said that he was hit by a separate bullet, that the first shot missed or hit Kennedy, but the first bullet did not hit him, and then he got hit by another bullet. He said that from the day till the day he died.
Now, real quick about Connolly. What about the quote from Connolly when he said, "Oh no, they're going to kill us all"?
Yeah, he made that comment exactly,
Yeah, right. So then, do you think he knew that this was going to happen?
I think he speculated that. I think he thought there was more than one shooter when he said it.
Okay. And what about the? Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Getting back to the single bullet before we run out of time here. The bullet that did all this supposed damage was found on a stretcher at Parkland Hospital by an orderly, and to this day they don't know for sure what stretcher it came off of. They just assume it came off a Connolly stretcher because they had to prove that this bullet did hit both men, but we don't know that for sure. The bullet itself is remarkable because it's deformed only at the base a little bit, flattened out at the base, but the tip of the nose of the bullet is almost in perfect condition. And Dr. Robert Shaw, who did the surgery on John Connolly, who was a World War II surgeon, he had operated on many people who were injured in wartime by bullets. He testified before the Warren Commission that there's no way in the world that bullet that they found on that stretcher could have done the damage to Connolly and come out looking the way it looked. He said, I've seen bullets hit bones for many years, and every bullet that hits bones gets deformed, always, 100% of the time. He said, this bullet comes out looking perfect. It's impossible because the bullet that went through Connolly not only took out part of his rib, it took out his right wrist, which is the hardest, densest bone in your body. And Cyril Wecht, who's an expert pathologist on this, he said that if they ever come up with a bullet like Oswald's, that they can fire into a cadaver's wrist and have it come out looking like Commission Exhibit 399, which is a magic bullet, then I'll quit arguing that there's a conspiracy because it'll never happen. Because every bullet that goes into a cadaver's wrist that they've test fired has been totally flattened and deformed like you would expect it to look.
Right.
So this bullet could not have hit Connolly and come out looking the way it did. And it's just amazing. I mean, plus the trajectory doesn't even line up on the single bullet theory. Shaw, the doctor, said that the trajectory through Connolly's body is steeper than the trajectory of the bullet that would have hit Kennedy, because they measured the angle of the bullet that went through Connolly. And it's a totally different trajectory from the one that would have hit Kennedy. So that proves it couldn't have been the same bullet.
Well, real quick, what do you think about the theory about the driver turning around and firing a shot?
Oh, no, that's been disproven. That's a photo mirage. What you see is sunlight is reflecting off Roy Kellerman's hair, the agent sitting in the front car with the driver, William Greer. It looks like Greer turns around with a .45 or a pistol and shoots, but what looks like a gun is actually a reflection of sunlight off the hair of the agent. So if you look at it real close, it's an optical illusion.
Gotcha.
But anyway, the thing about getting back to it real quickly, Robert Groden has done work on this. He has a photo that he gave me that shows both Kennedy and Connolly lined up exactly in front of each other in the motorcade, because the Warren Commission said, Connolly was sitting just a little bit to the left of his seat was to the left of Kennedy, and that's why the bullet could match up and go through with both men. Well, actually, there's a photograph taken from the follow-up car that Groden has that shows both men lined up perfectly behind each other. So there you have photographic proof that the bullet couldn't have done what it did. Also, Groden has another photograph taken right before the first shot was fired that shows how both Kennedy and Connolly were lined up in front of each other from the side. And when you take the trajectory of where it hit Kennedy in the back, because we know where it hit Kennedy, it hit him several inches below his neck, because that's where the bullet hole is in the clothing, and that's where the bullet hole is on the autopsy pictures of his back. I'll get into that in just a second. So we know where the bullet hit Kennedy. It could not have come out of his neck, coming down from the sixth floor of the book depository. Right. No bullet could come into 6 inches below your back and then come out at your neck unless it ricocheted up. Another reason why the theory's crazy.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. Okay, we got about 7 minutes or 8 minutes. What do you want to get out?
Well, like there's so much more we can talk about. I'll come back on your show and we'll talk about some more
Thank
things.
you.
But overall, I mean, just in the last 2 hours, to the listeners, I hope that they've learned a lot from this, and that I'm not afraid to debate people about this, because I think I can destroy just about anybody with the evidence that I have. But I hope they'll buy my book and read it and enjoy it, because I think it's a good book based on a lot of hard evidence. It tells an interesting story, fictional, of course, but it's got a lot of fact mixed in with it. And I hope that they'll read the book and see if they can, see if they enjoy it.
Real quick, there's a time travel aspect to your book. Tell us about that, because my audience is into time travel. What do you got?
Well, the time travel thing is not impossible, by the way, because I talked to a scientist, or actually the professor of physics at the University of Connecticut, has a PhD, and I talked to him about the time travel, because he's written books on time travel, and he told me, when I told him what I was doing about my book, he said, well, what you're writing about is not a fairy tale, it's not impossible. He said that he believes that time travel will be possible by the end of this century, that it actually will happen. And this is a PhD in physics just telling me this, and so I thought, wow, it's interesting that he believes it. So who knows, who knows what's going to happen 50 years from now, but, there may be a day when we can actually go back in time sometime. So,
well, you know what, if they did have, if they have time travel in the future, then they have time travel now, because they'd be traveling from the future to now. And if they could do that, it would seem likely, too, that they would be traveling back to the Kennedy assassination and kind of moving around and fiddling with evidence and stuff.
Right. Well, if you took a poll and asked people if you could go back in time to one or two events, what would you want to go back to see? A lot of people would say JFK's assassination, because they want to know the truth. I mean, we don't know the truth about who killed John F. Kennedy. I mean, I'm just going to state that as a fact. I don't care who disagrees with me. We do not know the whole truth on this thing, because in the last 2 hours I put enough evidence on the table that could go into a courtroom where it would totally prove that at least more than one person had to have killed Kennedy.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So now, one thing that I forgot to talk about, we still have time left? Or?
Yeah, we've got about 5.
Oswald could not have been on the 6th. Are you there? Hello?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oswald has a perfect alibi, number one. If I was his defense attorney, I would throw this out. Oswald was seen in the lunchroom of the Texas School Book Depository at 12:15, 15 minutes before Kennedy was shot. We know that because several employees saw him down there. One employee signed an affidavit. Her name is Carolyn Arnold. She worked in the depository. She saw him eating lunch at 12:15 because there was a clock on the wall, and she noticed the time. At the same time, at 12:15 outside, witnesses remember seeing a man on the 6th floor in the window with a high-powered rifle waiting for the motorcade. And the reason why they know the time is because the Kurtz rent-a-car sign that was on top of the building at the time, it's not there anymore, but it was there on the day of the assassination. It flashed the time and the temperature every few seconds. And people remember seeing the time being flashed on top of the building while they were seeing this sniper in the window. Well, obviously, if the times are correct, then Oswald can't be in the lunchroom eating his lunch if he's on the 6th floor with a gun in his hand. So that couldn't have been Oswald in the window with the rifle. He has an airtight alibi right there. He was seen in the lunchroom 90 seconds after the shots went off, not out of breath, not excited, not nervous. He had a Coke in his hand. and he was confronted by a police officer and by Roy Truly. This is a minute and a half after the shots go off. If Oswald killed Kennedy on the 6th floor, he would have had to run across the floor with all the book cartons stacked with it. He had to run across and dodge all the book cartons, hide the rifle carefully, because the rifle was not just thrown down, it was hidden carefully up there. He'd have to run down 4 flights of stairs because there was no elevator that worked. He had to come downstairs if he was up there and not be seen by anybody, because there were people on the stairs coming down at that time that would have seen Oswald pass him on the stairs. Nobody saw Oswald come down the stairs. And then he would have had to gotten change, because he didn't have change for a Coke, because the supervisor told the Warren Commission that she's the one that gave him change for a Coke. That took time. And then he'd have to go in there and get the Coke out, and all that would have to be done in 90 seconds, and he'd have to not be out of breath or be nervous. That's impossible.
That is impossible. We got like 2 minutes. What else you got? 1 minute.
Well, I just want to say that I hope the American people will continue to be interested in this case, because it's an unsolved murder as far as I'm concerned, and 80% of the country does not believe the Warren Commission anymore. That's every poll tells us that. So I hope that people have enjoyed my talk on the show today, and I'll come back and do another show sometime. And I hope they'll buy the book and read it and enjoy it. It's also available from Barnes & Noble, too, and it's also available from my website, themanfrom2063.com, so you can get the book that way, too.
Okay, great. Themanfrom2063.com. There's a time travel aspect to the book, which I know all my people love that kind of stuff. And I definitely want to have you back, Jack. I can't thank you enough. You're an encyclopedia of knowledge about this case. And maybe we can bring your friend Grogan back as well.
Robert Grogan, yeah, sure.
Yeah, okay. Opperman Report. We're heading out now. Thank you, Jack. And I'll talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Listening to Revolution Radio.
Most guys freeze. That's your cerebral cortex looking for an answer it doesn't have.
See? Even your brain knows you're screwed.
The body's filling with adrenaline right now, whether you know it or not. Your heart's beating fast. It's getting a little harder to breathe. Your neurobiological system is telling it to run, but your knees are too weak to move.
Fear is not real. The only place that fear can exist is in our thoughts of the future. It is a product of our imagination, causing us to fear things that do not at present and may not ever exist. That is near insanity. Do not misunderstand me. Danger